begin. So again, I'll just do my initial introduction, as I always do. This is the latest in the series of short training webinars, and my name is David Fass. I'm the trainer at iNetSoft. So these training webinars are intended to give a quick, short and sweet introduction to particular topics. And today's topic is creating materialized views. And in parentheses here, hopefully everybody can see my screen. I am displaying a slide right now. So if you cannot see my screen, please let me know. So on the slide here, it says creating materialized views, and in parentheses, data caches, because materialized views is really a term that I think we use. I'm not sure that anybody else uses that term, but basically what we're going to talk about is caching data for a particular type of scenario when using dashboards. So like I always say, everyone is muted by default. So if you want to talk to me, don't talk. Instead, type. Type in the question box or in the chat box, whatever you have in your interface there, and I should see that pop up on my screen, and then I can talk back at you. Okay, so let's begin. The plan here is going to be, I think this will be a pretty short session. I am recording it. I say that more to remind myself, I think, than to let you guys know. But if there's anybody that you know that wanted to hear this webinar and couldn't for whatever reason, the recording should be available usually by Monday, and an email will go out to all the registrants and with the link to the video, and it will be on YouTube. Okay, so the plan here is, first of all, to tell you what is a materialized view and why would you want to have one. And then once I've convinced you that you might want one, how would you go about creating one? And then what are some best practices? So that's really the whole sketch of the little talk today. So first of all, materialized view. What is it? So let me open up a dashboard that I have hanging around here somewhere. So I have my portal up and running, and I just opened Visual Composer. And I'm going to find this dashboard that I made before called Order Dashboard. And this is a very simple dashboard. Obviously, I did not take any pains to make this beautiful or engaging or otherwise interesting. But what I want to show you is that basically what I have here is a simple dashboard, and basically what happens is as you interact with the dashboard, here I'm interacting through Visual Composer, which is the design tool, of course, but the same would be true if I were interacting with the dashboard as a user in the portal. Basically, as I make these various filtering selections and other interactions with the dashboard, what's happening is that behind the scenes, the server is sending queries to the database, right? And that's how I get different different slices of data as I make those different filtering choices, right? So I can choose that I want to see a particular set of companies, a particular subset of users, and a particular date range. And depending on those interactions that I make, the dashboard will have to send different queries to the database to retrieve the appropriate data, right? So that's that's the basic operation of a dashboard. Hopefully that will not be surprising to anyone that's the way it works, because the database has the data, the dashboard needs the data, so it's going to have to get the data from the database. And in general, the dashboard is not going to want to pull back all of the data in the database, because that would be gigantic, right? The database has potentially hundreds of millions of records, right? The dashboard wants to pull back just the data that you want to see, right? So depending on the selections you make, it's going to ask for just the data that you need. The problem with this is that for very large data sets, or for very complex dashboards, each time you make an interaction like that and a new query is sent to the database, it can take a long time for that query, from the results of that query, to come back and populate the dashboard. So although things look very snappy in this example that I'm showing you right here, because first of all, it's a very simple dashboard. Second of all, I'm working off of our sample database, which is tiny. So everything works great. Things come back in a fraction of a second. What you would find if you were creating a dashboard that's looking at massive amounts of data, or it's a very complex dashboard, you'd find that if you try to do this, things are going to take a lot longer. In other words, you might make a selection, a filtering choice here, and then you might have to wait. right? It's not going to come back right away. You might see a spinning wheel, which is the indicator that, processing is taking place. And then maybe after 10 seconds, 20 seconds, it really depends, then the data will come back and populate the dashboard. In a lot of cases, that kind of delay, that kind of latency in getting the data back really impairs the usability of the dashboard, because the whole idea of the dashboard is that a user should be able to do quick interactions with the data, slice and dice, explore, and if every operation on the dashboard is going to chew up 30 seconds, then that user is going to get frustrated pretty quickly and give up on that the entire enterprise. So this is where materialized views, or data caching for dashboards, comes in. And the basic theory here is that we want to prevent the dashboard from having to repeatedly submit queries to the database. Right, so rather than every time when I make a filtering selection here, rather than having the dashboard shoot off a query to the database, we want to prevent that from happening, and basically we want not to involve the database at all. So how can we do that? How can we cut out the communication with the database and this whole sending back and forth of queries and result sets? The way that we do that is by building a cached data set, and that's what we call a materialized view. So the idea here is, rather than sending queries to the database, what we do is, on some off time, let's say the middle of the night or something like that, we run the queries on the database, all the queries that we expect to need. We run the queries, we pull back the data, and then we store the data from the database in a file on the disk. Right? So a file on the server, all the data that's required for the dashboard gets stored there. And then the idea is that the next time that the user has to interact with the dashboard, right? So let's say the next day, the vice president comes in and he opens up his dashboard, and he or she starts, making these filtering selections. They are no longer sending queries to the database. Instead, what they're doing is they're pulling data out of that cached data file that resides on disk. So basically, we cut out the communication with the database, and we're just communicating, we're just reading and writing from a kind of a fixed data file, right? So that's the whole concept of the materialized view. Now you may ask, well, is that really faster than communicating with the database? And the answer is yes. In many cases it is, not all cases, but in many cases, in particular where you're dealing with very large data sets, that is faster. It's faster to build that cached data, that data file on the disk. It's faster to access that rather than accessing the database, and the difference in speed can be quite noticeable. Right? So if you are dealing with large data sets, or if you're dealing with very complex dashboards, and you notice that the latency in the user interaction is becoming a problem, then the first thing that you'll want to try is to use a materialized view for your dashboards. Okay, so that's the concept of materialized view, and chances are, again, if you're working with a large data set, you'll probably want to build materialized views for your dashboards. Okay, so that basically covers the motivation. The next thing that I want to get into is, how do you do it, right? So how do you build, if you've decided that in fact you do need a materialized view, how do you make a materialized view for a dashboard? Okay, so I'm going to now go to the Enterprise Manager. Enterprise Manager is the administration tool, and this is something that an administrator would set up. So an end user would not be doing this type of thing. This is something that the administrator would do if it becomes apparent that that a dashboard needs a materialized view. So I'm going to close Visual Composer here and go back to, here's the portal. I'm back in the portal, and I'm going to go into Enterprise Manager. Log into Enterprise Manager. Okay, and in Enterprise Manager, what you would do to create a materialized view is you go to the repository folder here on the left. Oh, there's a question. Hang on. There's a question here. Do you have to build that materialized view every time you add data to your tables? No, and we'll get into that, right? So, so the question is, if you, let's say that you build this materialized view, this cache data set on the disk, and then the next day somebody adds a bunch of new records into the database, do you manually have to rebuild it? The answer is no. However, it does need to be rebuilt. So I guess the answer to your question is yes and no. It does need to be rebuilt because obviously if you want the new records that were added to the database and you want those to appear in your dashboard, and your dashboard is only accessing the cache data, then obviously you need to rebuild the cache. However, no, you don't need to do it manually, right? And we'll talk about how that happens automatically. It's a good question. Okay, so what I was just saying is that the method to do this is under the main server tab in Enterprise Manager. You open the repository folder here on the left, and there's a subfolder called materialized view, and this is basically where you're going to do stuff related to materialized views. So the first thing you would do is you would go to the create page, and you would find the dashboard or dashboards that you want to materialize. Okay, so So in this case, this order dashboard is the one that I was just showing you in Visual Composer. You can actually select multiple dashboards. So if you wanted to do materialization, kind of in one shot for a whole bunch of dashboards, you could make multiple selections here. All right, so here I've got this guy. Select that, press the arrow button on the right, and then it adds it as a selected view sheet. Okay, if I wanted to add other ones here, I could add other ones as well. Okay, now down at the bottom, there are a couple of options. I'm not going to, by the way, as I go through this process, I'm not going to describe every single option. Most of them are described in the documentation, so, but I just want to point out the main features here. One thing that I do want to point out here is that in general, you'll want to select bypass VPM. There's an option here, apply VPM or bypass VPM. VPM, I'm not sure if we've covered it in a webinar, but some of you are probably familiar with it. It's basically a data level filtering construct that you can set up in Style Studio. It applies a filter basically at the data level, at the either at the table level or at the physical view level of a data model. But in general, when you're working with materialized views, you will probably not want to apply the VPM. And there are a number of reasons for that. Just at a high level, the complexity is that applying the VPM, right, which is the other option here, apply VPM may result in the creation of a tremendously large number of cached data sets. The reason for that is that the VPM may be applying filtering based on users, groups, or roles, right? And if that's the case, and when you're doing something like that, when you have a VPM that's filtering based on users, groups, and roles, what that means is that different users will be seeing different data, right? So if a user named Eric logs in, Eric sees one set of data. If a user named Sue logs in, Sue sees a different set of data, right? That's one of the things that you can do in a VPM. The problem with that, when you're using materialized views, is that the question is then, how do you build the cached data set? Right? And the answer is, you really have to build a separate cache data set for each user. So if you have hundreds of users, then you might be talking about building this materialized view, a separate materialized view for all those different users, right? So without going into the nitty-gritty details of it, at least you can get the sense that that could pose a bit of a problem. Both in terms of the amount of time it takes to do that, right? How long would it take to build a materialized view for all those users, and other considerations as well. So in general, if you're using VPMs and you're using materialized views, you'll want to nevertheless bypass the VPM. The question is then, well, what if you do want to do some kind of filtering, for example, based on user, group, or role? If you're bypassing the VPM, then how do you do that? And we'll talk about that later on. And basically the answer is that you can implement those filters, those user, role, or group-based filters, you can implement those in a data worksheet as well, and that would be the recommended procedure. So my only point here is to suggest that in most cases, you'll want to bypass the VPM when you're doing materialized view. So the next step here is you press the Analyze button. And basically what this does is it looks at your view sheet, looks at the dashboard, and you get this table here that tells you what assets can be materialized in that dashboard. Right? And now if we look at this a little bit more closely, you'll notice that there's a column here called Table. Right? So what does that refer to? Well, basically this is referring to the data block in the underlying data worksheet. Right, so let's go back, and I'll come back to this page in just a moment, but let's go back to Visual Composer. Right, so here was the dashboard that I was showing you. There's a question, hold on. Okay, so Jim says that he never really had an issue with applying the VPM with the materialized view. So so there's a data point for those who are wondering which way to go. So so not always a problem, but nevertheless, this is the advice that I can give, is to select the bypass VPM. But it seems like Jim does fine with applying the VPM. Okay, thank you for that, Jim. So so we're back here looking at this dashboard. What I wanted to show you is that underlying the dashboard, there's a data worksheet. In other words, this dashboard is based on a data worksheet, which I can open by clicking the link at the bottom of the dashboard. Right, and so here's the data worksheet. Right, and so the table that it's referring to, right, so if I go back here, right, so order data / order one, what does that refer to? That refers to this data block in the worksheet. The name of this worksheet is order data, and the name of this data block is order one, right? So that is what it's referring to. And basically the way the materialized view works is it caches the data block, right? So materialized views work on a data block level basis, right? So that is what is actually being cached in this case. The dashboard is pulling data from this data worksheet. This data worksheet has just a single data block. Of course, it could have more. And basically, when you generate the materialized view, what you're caching is the data in one or more data blocks. Right? So that actually has some significance that we'll talk about later, but just from the mechanics of it, that's just something to keep in mind, that what is actually being cached is the data block in the data worksheet. Okay, so back over here. Right, so what you do is you might have a list now of, depending on how many dashboards you've selected to materialize and how many data blocks are in those dashboards, you might have a lengthy list here, but obviously I selected just one dashboard, and that one dashboard uses a data worksheet with just a single data block, so there's only one item here. So I would select that. And then basically what you do is you would select a cycle down here in the bottom here. It says set cycle. And generally you would have a list of several cycles here. Right now, there's just one called MV cycle, right? So I selected that, and if we look somewhere in this table here, all the way on the right side here, you can see there's a cycle column, and it's now set to MV cycle. So what does that mean, right? The cycle is basically it's just a specification of a periodic event, right? And I'll show you after we're done here, I'll show you how you would create a cycle. MV cycle is a predefined cycle, and basically it just specifies something like every night at 1 a.m. in the morning, right? That's what a cycle could be. It might be something like daily, 1 a.m., right? That's all a cycle is. And so basically what I'm specifying here is that I want to rebuild this materialized view on the cycle that I selected, right? So I want to rebuild the materialized view from the database every night at 1 a.m. or whatever the cycle specifies, right? So that's the answer to your question, Hind, is do you have to rebuild the materialized view every time data is added into the database? The answer is you don't have to do it manually, but it does have to be done, right? Now, you can choose to specify that it should be done every night, or every once a week, or every 5 hours, right? So there are different ways that you can specify the build cycle. But that's how you would kind of automatically keep this data cache up to date. And what happens when the materialized view is rebuilt is basically the same thing that happens when we build it initially, right? Basically, when the cycle kicks off, the server sends queries to the database, whatever queries are necessary to build the materialized view, and it just rebuilds the materialized view. Generally, you would do that on some off hour in the middle of the night or something like that, because that could take time. A materialized view could take a long time to build, depending on how much data it's actually aggregating and storing on the disk, right? So that might take an hour, might take longer, might take less, but it's going to be an intensive operation, and it'll obviously use some database resources as well. So you'd want to do that when people aren't, otherwise engaging with the database, and the database has some, free cycles that can do this. So those are the basics, right? You select which data blocks you want to materialize. You select the cycle on which you want to generate them, and then you would just press the Create Update button over here. Right? There's also a Show Plan button. I just want to mention one thing about this. If you press Show Plan, it just gives you some cryptic information about what's happening. And the only thing I'm going to say about this is that in some cases you may see it say something to the effect or use a term called sub MV over here. So right now it just says top MV, top materialized view, and it tells you some other stuff about which table it's materializing and what filters operate on that data and so on. But in other cases, you might see a list of other items here, and some of them might say sub MV. In general, if you see sub MV, that means that there is something about the architecture of your data worksheet that is going to prevent you from realizing the full performance benefit of the materialized view. Because when you see sub MV, it means basically that the server is going to have to do some post-processing on the cached data, and the post-processing is always going to be less efficient. So the Show Plan button, the main thing to look for is just to see if it says sub MV anywhere there, and that will give you a little bit of a hint that you might be able to do better, in some cases much better, by making some structural changes to your data worksheet. Okay, let me, I see there's a question. Okay, so there's a question. Would you please describe run in background? Right, so there's an option here called run in background. Basically what this does, if you select that and then you press create update, then rather than so if you don't select that, if you leave that, let me say it this way, if you leave that disabled and then you press create update, then it's going to start running the materialized view right now, right? And that could be an intensive process. So, in some cases you might not want to do that. If you select run in background, then basically what it does when you press create update is it will automatically create a scheduled task that will run the materialized view at a later time, right? In our case here, it really doesn't matter because our data is so small that I could do it either way and it'll come back immediately. But if you're looking at if you're looking at a materialized view that could take an hour to generate, you might want to select the run in background option, which should create an automatic schedule task that you can then find under the schedule tab, right? So no, I'm not actually going to do that, but anyway, that's the way it should work. You select that, it automatically generates a schedule task, and then you click on the schedule tab, and you should see the task there, and where you could further modify it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just press create update, and it should come back and in a moment tell me that materialized views have been successfully created. So obviously that was far faster than you would ever experience with a real world database. But that's the magic of having a sample database with just 4,000 records, is that everything happens really fast. So that is the basics of it. So now we've generated a materialized view. Now, if we want to manage materialized views that we've created previously, there's a manage page, right? So you would just, so this is the create page. Now we've created it, and if you look at the table here, it says exists, yes, has data, yes, right? So you might wonder, how could you possibly have a case where the materialized view exists but does not have data? Well, that can actually happen, right? You can define a materialized view, and if you leave the generate data option disabled, right, then what it will do is basically create the structure. It just defines the materialized view, but it doesn't actually run the queries and populate the materialized view with data, right? So in that case, you might see over here, it might say exists, yes, has data, no, right? And what that means is that basically it's going to wait until the next iteration of the cycle to run the queries and populate it with data. So there are various switches that you can set here to do things in different ways, but I'm just trying to show you the the big picture here. Okay, under the manage page, if you click manage under the materialized view folder, right, so there's our materialized view. There's a whole bunch of different columns here that I'm not going to go through them. You can actually choose which columns you want to see in this table, right? So right now it's showing me all of the columns, but it makes it kind of impossible to read them. So you can, if there are some of these columns that you find less informative, you just turn off the columns here. I could turn off this one maybe, and turn off, whether there's a backup or not, and turn off the size, right? So things I don't need, I can modify the table so that it's a little bit more readable. And then basically what I can do here is I can select any materialized view. Again, there might be multiple materialized views listed here. And I can choose which one I want to work on. I can select reanalyze, right? So in other words, if I've perhaps made some changes to the data worksheet or some changes to the dashboard, and I want that I believe may influence the structure of the materialized view. For example, if I've added data blocks into the data worksheet, that might certainly influence the materialized view, the structure of the materialized view. So I could do reanalyze, and that would run me through the basically through the process that we just did. You can also back up a materialized view in the event that if it gets corrupted or something, you could restore from backup. And then again, you have the create and update button. There is also an options page, right? That's the third item here under the materialized view folder, right? And here there's a set of options. I'm just going to summarize them very quickly. They are in the documentation, so and I actually have that page open. So if you go to the documentation, which is of course online, there's a page here called Materialized View Options, which should describe all of those options. At least the last time I checked, it described all of them. So Enable MV on Demand is basically is kind of a master switch that determines whether there's an option that's shown in Visual Composer. So let's see if I can find that. So I'm back in Visual Composer here, and I'm looking at the dashboard in Visual Composer. If I go to the Options dialog box, there is an option here. This is just in the regular, in Visual Composer, the regular dashboard design tool. This is the view sheet options. There's an option here called Create MV on Demand, and you can see it says Disabled by Admin. So basically what this option does, right, if I turn that on as the view sheet designer, right, so right now I'm in the role of the dashboard designer, if I turn that on, basically it means that if a user accesses this dashboard and for some reason there is no materialized view, right, and that could be for any reason, right, it could be because maybe somebody deleted the file, right? So the data is gone, or whatever else you could think of. Maybe it's that maybe the materialized view is in the middle of generating, or so for whatever reason there's not a materialized view. Then what this will do is it will automatically start creating a materialized view, right, at the time that the user opens the dashboard, right? So that can be good and it can be bad. Again, that's kind of something that you would need to play around with because if the user opens the dashboard and right then and there it starts generating the materialized view, right, that could take quite a while, right? So the user might have to wait a while for that materialized view to generate. That might not be so good. On the other hand, maybe that's what you want to happen in that case. Because on the other hand, running the dashboard directly against the database might also not be such a good option, right? If you know that dashboard will be incredibly unresponsive if you run it directly against the database, then you might not want that to happen. In that case, it might be preferable for the dashboard to sit there and generate the materialized view. So anyway, that's an option that the designer of the dashboard can set. But as you can see, the master switch for this is controlled by the administrator. So right now, even though as a designer I can turn this on or off, it doesn't matter because it tells me here it's been disabled by the administrator, right? So in order for this option to have any effect whatsoever, right, an administrator would have to turn on Enable MV on Demand. Right, so this is the master switch that allows that to happen, and it's off by default. So by default, the designer of the dashboard really can't make a decision one way or the other. They just don't have that. They don't have that authority. The administrator first has to enable this option. There's also an option here, MV on Demand by default. That means basically if the administrator selects this, then that feature is always on for every dashboard by default, right? Unless the dashboard designer turns it off. So by default, right, if this option is on, then dashboards will generate an MV automatically if one does not exist. And you can set a cycle here. there's an option, use metadata for editing if MV is not available, right? So the question is, with regard to this property, if you're in a situation where, for whatever reason, again, the materialized view is not available, maybe somebody deleted it, and then you as a designer, you open up that dashboard and you want to start editing it, the question is, what happens, right? So, is it going to go against the database, right? As you're designing the dashboard, it'll start running queries on the database, or is it automatically going to go into metadata mode for editing, right? What is metadata mode? Right, metadata mode is this option here, right? So again, I'm still in view sheet options. There's an option called use metadata, and it looks like this, right? So if you're designing a dashboard in metadata mode, you don't see the data, right? You just see the representation, the layout of the dashboard. You see all the components, but no data in the components, right? Just placeholder information. So if that option is set by the administrator, right, then basically if that option is set, then if a designer opens up a dashboard for editing and the materialized view is not available for that dashboard, and the dashboard is supposed to use a materialized view, that goes without saying, then if this option is set, then it will go directly into this metadata mode. Right? If that option is not set, then basically it'll go against the database, right? So it'll run queries on the database. Then there's an option here, fail if MV is not available at runtime. This means basically that if, again, for whatever reason, a user opens up a dashboard and the dashboard is supposed to use a materialized view, but no materialized view is available. Again, maybe that's because somebody unfortunately deleted the file, right? Or maybe there was some horrible virus on the server, deleted a bunch of files, the materialized view cached file is gone, right? So then what happens when a user opens that dashboard, right? So there's really I guess there's three things that could happen. It could regenerate the materialized view, or it could run queries directly on the database, or it could just say, sorry, bub, can't run this dashboard, right? And this option here, if you turn that on, basically it's that third option, right? So if there's no materialized view, and the user tries to open that dashboard, if this option is set, then basically it'll just throw up an error message. And I don't know exactly what the error message is, but something to the effect that sorry, this dashboard is not available, or something to that effect. Now, why would you want to do that? Why would that be preferable to the other options? Again, the reason is that you might know that dashboard is simply not usable if it's running directly against the database, right? It's just, if you know that that dashboard will take 30 seconds to respond to any user interaction, then you might just say, that is, it's better not to have the user even be in that situation. It's better just to say dashboard is not available or cannot load or whatever. And then the user obviously can, at that point, call up their IT person and say, what's up with my dashboard? And then, then the professionals can handle it from there, figure out why the materialized view is not available. Then there's an option to back up the materialized view. It just creates a backup whenever the materialized view generates. So those are the options. There's a question. Okay, so the question is, does this data cache apply only to view sheets or Style Studio reports as well? I mean, if my dashboard report is created in Style Studio and is running using queries that is built in the query builder. Good question. So yes, or rather no. The materialized view that we're talking about here applies only to dashboards that you build in Visual Composer, right? Not reports that you build in Style Studio. And pardon me, the reason for that is that really only dashboards need this kind of cache. Because reports, even though reports may pull back tremendous amounts of data, generally reports run once and then there's little or no further user interaction. Although some reports are have parameters, you can make parameter selections and then the report regenerates with the with the new parameters. But generally when you run a report, that's kind of it. The report comes back, it displays in the portal, you might export it, you might scroll through it or page through it, but you're not doing this kind of ongoing repeated submission of new parameters that you're doing in a dashboard like this, where you might be continuously dragging the range slider, making different selections, many times a minute, generally that level of interactivity is not happening in a report, and so it's really not that much of a consideration for a report. I think that was the question. So let's come back to this. Okay, so those were some of the options that I wanted to go through. Okay, what else? Now about that cycle, right? So we've seen in a couple of places that you can set an MV cycle, right? Here again is the manage page, right? And you can, if you need to change a cycle or set a cycle, right? You can do that, right? So where do these cycles come from? These cycles are defined under the schedule tab, right? So let's take a quick look at setting up a cycle, and then we'll hit a couple last topics and best practices. So under the schedule tab, let's go there. You'll notice that under the schedule tab, there is a cycles folder, and right now there's just a single cycle in there called MV cycle. If you want to see what that is defined to do, you can click on it. And basically, this cycle is set to run monthly on the first day of the month, basically every month. So I was wrong, it's not a daily cycle. But what we could do if we wanted to create a daily cycle, we would go down to the bottom. There's a link at the bottom called New Cycle. And I can call it something like nightly, maybe just nightly. And this could be defined as a daily cycle. Sounds like a contradiction, nightly and daily, but anyway, daily cycle. And I might say, this cycle will run 1:30 a.m. I'll just leave this as it is, let's say on weekdays, right? 1:30 a.m. weekdays, this cycle is going to run, and then I press save, right? And now I've got a cycle here called nightly. So now when I go to set up my materialized views, that option should be available. So if I go back under server, the main server tab, materialized view, manage, right? So now I can select that materialized view and switch the cycle here to nightly, right? And now if you look under cycle here, that materialized view is going to run on the nightly cycle, which means that every night it's going to run queries on the database and rebuild that data cache. Okay, so that's most of what you need to know about the mechanics of building materialized views, right? So you know how to create them, you know how to manage them, there are some options as to what happens if for whatever reason materialized view is not available. What does the dashboard? How does the dashboard respond in that case? And there's a question. Okay, question is, can you explain the difference between MV cycle and run in background again? Yeah, run in background basically, let me just move this thing. Okay, run in background basically means it pertains kind of just to right now, right? If you're going to regenerate the materialized view right now, do you want it to start doing that right now? Right? Do you want to start sending the queries to the database right now and building that materialized view, or do you want to delay that for another time? Right? So actually, I think it will. If I do run in background, I think it will create. Okay, let me actually delete this, and I'll just start over. We'll just see exactly what that does. So if I go to create, and just do this again from scratch. Bypass VPM. Analyze. Okay, run in background. Okay, let's see what's going to happen. So I have generate data, run in background. And I'm going to do create update. Right, it says, you'll notice the message here is different than it was before. It says materialized views have been successfully scheduled. Right, successfully scheduled. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the schedule tab and click on schedule tasks. And what I can see here is that there's MV task, blah, 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 order data enabled. Right, so there is now a task defined here. Now the question is, do I have any flexibility as to how I determine when that's going to run? I think it seems to. Yeah. So basically, it just takes over by itself. There's really not a whole lot you can do with it. So basically, you're just telling it, I don't want to run this now. You just handle it. You run it at some other time. And so basically, that's what it's going to do. It just schedules that task, and it runs, right? So this is the automatic task that was generated when I selected run in background. Right, so this is the automatic task, and it's going to run on its own at some point. The scheduler is going to run it, and when it finishes running, then this task disappears and no longer is visible in that list. Right, so that's you would use that basically if you don't want the materialized view to actually begin generating right at the time that you're creating the materialized view definition. Okay, I hope that explained it somewhat. And I don't think there's anything. I don't think there's anything further that you can modify about it. It's one of these automatic tasks. There's just there's not much else you can do with them. Okay, and it'll just disappear when it's finished running. Okay. So let me add one more twist to this. Oh, there's another question. Sure. So I'm going to add one more twist to this, and then we'll just talk about best practices. The last twist is that in many cases you may not want the materialized view to completely regenerate, right? So let's imagine a case where the materialized view, this data cache file, is basically let's say it's 3 million, represents 3 million records or something like that, and every day the database has, let's say 3,000 new records added to it, right? I don't know if that's realistic or not. Just take it as an example. So the thing is that let's say you're regenerating this materialized view every night. You might just want to, rather than regenerate the full 3 million records, you might just want to add in the new 3,000, or I think I'm changing the numbers, apologize for that, but 3,000 new records that were added to the database. You might just want to add in those new 3,000 records into the existing materialized view rather than regenerating the full 3 million record data set. Right, so how would you do that? It seems quite sensible, but yet we haven't seen anything here that would allow us to do that. So basically, if you want to do that, you have to do that in the data worksheet. So let me go back to the data worksheet. Again, this is the data worksheet that the dashboard is using, and this is the data block in the data worksheet that's actually being cached. Right, this is what's actually being materialized. And so if you want to control the data that's added into the materialized view every time it regenerates, you have to do that by adding a so-called MV condition on the data block. Right, so the way you do that is you press the define condition button in the data block. Right, that's this button over here. And you'll notice that there's two tabs here. There's a conditions tab. This is just for entering regular conditions, like you would enter a condition here like I want data only from the year 2014 or something like that. That would be a regular condition. The MV update condition allows you to add conditions that will control how records are added from the database into the materialized view. And there's various things you can do here. You can append records matching pre-aggregate conditions, append records matching post-aggregate conditions. I just want to show you the most common one that you might do, and then the rest of these, if you want to, you could play around with. Probably the most common thing you'd want to do is add in records that have been added to the database since the last time that the materialized view was generated. Right. So in other words, let's say your materialized view is generating every night in the middle of the night, right? And every day the database has 3,000 new records added to it. So probably what you want to do is every night when the materialized view generates is you want to add those 3,000 records into the existing materialized view, right? So that's probably the most common thing you would want to do with an MV update condition. And the way you do it is you press the edit button here, right? And then you would make a condition that looks like this: order date. Order date is one of the fields in the data block, right? So that's right. So this order date field would contain, would basically have the dates for the 3,000 new records that are added, right? So they would, they'd probably all be from, just from the past day, right? So order date here would be a bunch of dates from the past day, and you'd want order date is greater than, and then on the all the way on the right side here, you would switch this. There's a pop-up button there. Switch this to expression, right? And I'm going through this quickly because I just want to get to the end result. And then I press the FX button here to edit the expression. And when you're setting an expression here, there are some built-in variables that are available. And one of them is last update time, right? So I could just select that, press OK, right? And that would give me a condition here: order date is greater than mv.lastUpdateTime. So what is mv.lastUpdateTime? Basically, that gives me the time at which the materialized view was last regenerated, right? So let's say the last time that the materialized view was regenerated was 1:30 a.m. this morning, early this morning, right? So that time would be substituted here for mv.lastUpdateTime. So basically the condition would then say order date is greater than 1:30 a.m. This morning, right? And so that means that any orders that have an order date that is after 1:30 a.m. this morning, only those records would match this condition, and therefore only those records would be added into the materialized view when it gets rebuilt. So basically the way to think about this, the MV update condition is a condition that gets checked when the materialized view is rebuilding, right? So the materialized view is, let's say it's about to start rebuilding. In other words, the cycle that determines when it runs, the cycle has kicked off. And so that cycle is going to start rebuilding the materialized view. It's going to check this condition, and it's only going to add in records, because this is in the append records area here. It's only going to add in records to the existing materialized view where this condition is met, which is that order date is greater than whatever value is returned in mv.lastUpdateTime, which in my example would be 1:30 a.m. this morning. Right, so that's a way to control, it's called an incremental materialized view update. Rather than rebuilding the whole thing, all 3 million or 10 million records, you just add in the records that have been most recently added to the database. There's a question. Yeah, so there's an option here, always append update. That, that's, unfortunately I don't have a great answer for that. I think always append updates, I think this may only pertain to a special case where you have a particular type of query. I was actually looking at the documentation here. You can see I actually searched for that option because I didn't recall what it did. And it's described over here in the MV update tab. This is in a section that describes incrementally updating a non-mergeable query. So this is a particular case that I'm not that familiar with, even though I wrote the documentation, but it was a while ago. So it's in an instance where what I just showed you does not work, right? So in an instance where that kind of automatic way of specifying the update condition filter, for some reason that doesn't work, then I think that is when you need to specify always append updates. Let me just see who was asking that question. I can get a better answer than that, but I don't have one right now. Who asked me that question? Sorry, I closed. Oh, there it is. Les. Okay, let me jot that down, and I'll try to get you a better answer than that. Okay, IMCI. Okay, I'll check with one of the developers what exactly when that option applies. Okay, but thanks for the question. I apologize, I don't have a great answer for you. Okay, so that's basically the high-level summary of materialized view. Why you would want to do it? Again, why? Because you will probably need it if you're dealing with very large data sets and dashboards, right? If you're in that situation, your dashboards probably will not be responsive enough if they're running against the database. If they're running live queries against the database, that's kind of just a fact that you're going to run into if you're working with very, very large data sets. And if that's the case, then the solution to that is the materialized view, right? And so basically I showed you the rudiments of how you build it, right? Again, back over here, right? You have under the repository folder, you've got this materialized view, create, manage options. That's how you build it. You set it to run on a cycle. I showed you how to define a cycle under the schedule tab over here, define a cycle or multiple cycles. And I showed you that there's this other twist that allows you to incrementally update the materialized view by putting a MV update condition on the data block. So now just to wrap up, I just want to hit some best practices here, some of which I've kind of hinted at already and some of which I haven't. Okay, so here's a slide. I'll just go through these one by one, and then I'll take any questions, and then we'll be done. So number one, use data worksheets. Now, obviously, in my example, I did use a data worksheet, but I don't know whether you would have inferred from that 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 is the recommended practice, but in fact it is. Use data worksheets as opposed to what? As opposed to, for example, building your dashboard directly on a data model, right? If you have a data model, then of course there's a great temptation, and there's nothing wrong with that, to build your dashboards directly on the data model. For example, you would do new view sheet, and you'd look in your data sources, and let's say you've got a data model like our sample order model. It's great. It's really nice to build a dashboard directly off the data model. You've got access to a tremendous number of fields. The problem is that that's not really advisable if you're going to create a materialized view for the dashboard. And the reason is that remember that a materialized view is basically you're pulling back data and storing in a file. If you base your dashboard on a data model, which is basically all of the fields in your database schema, for the most part, it's going to have to build a tremendously large cached file, right? Because it doesn't necessarily know, which of those fields, it needs, right? So it's going to have to build a much larger data cache than it would have to if you just use a data worksheet. So that's the first point: is if you're materializing, if you're creating materialized views for dashboards, then the best approach is to use data worksheets, right? And that's true even if you're basing the dashboard on a query. Let's say you've designed a query, and when you create your dashboards, you base them on the query rather than on a data model. It's still not a bad idea to use a data worksheet. In other words, you could just drag the query into a data worksheet and then base the dashboard on the data worksheet. One reason that's a good idea is that gives you the access to the MV update condition, right? You don't have that otherwise. You only have the ability to do an incremental update if you're using a data worksheet, if the dashboard is based on a worksheet. So, that's a question. Can you configure where the MVs are stored? That's a good question. I'm not sure if that's configurable. I don't know the answer. Let me add that. That's less again, hitting me with all the tough questions here. Okay, I'm just jotting it down. I don't know if that's configurable. I'm just thinking if I've ever seen a property for that. You know what I suspect? I think, here's my guess. My guess is that it's configurable, but it's not exposed in the Enterprise Manager. So I suspect there's probably a property in the properties file that would control that, but I can get you a better answer. I would be surprised if it was, completely, unadjustable. So I think there's probably a way to change it, but it's just not something we expose. Okay, so that's the first thing. Use data worksheets. Now over here, keep it simple. The reason for this, and we'll get to it, there's, as we go down the numbers here, there's another, we'll come back to this, but basically your best chance there's another question, but let me just finish my sentence. The best chance to take advantage of the efficiency of the materialized view is when you have a simple data worksheet. In other words, you don't have a ton of data blocks, and your dashboard is basically, the components in your dashboard are basically working off of a single data block. That's your best opportunity to really reap the benefits of the materialized view. And I'll mention just in a couple minutes that if you have more complex data worksheets, there's the possibility, although they could still be materialized, but the effect of that might be diminished, because the more complex the data worksheet is, the more likely it is that the server will need to do some post-processing on the cached data, and that's not good. Right, the more post-processing that the server has to do on the materialized view, the slower it's going to be, right? Because in general, you want the server just to be able to, read those records right out of a single materialized view file, and do nothing else. That's all it needs. It just looks in that materialized view file, pulls out the data, displays it in the dashboard. If it has to do more than that, if it has to start doing, other processing like, joins or concatenations on the data, that slows down the whole works. Let me take the next question. Jim has a question. Oh, wait, Jim has a whole bunch of stuff. Okay. You can configure the caching to build the materialized sheet. Caching during materialization can be quite large. Use another drive to handle the cache, but it's on the same machine. Okay. I'm not sure I understand entirely, but it sounds like Jim is saying that you can configure you can configure it, but I will try to get you the details. I think it was Les who had the initial question, but thanks, Jim. Sounds like you're ahead of me on that one, um, as you usually are. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, share MVs at the data block level. What does that mean? That means that because the data blocks are what is being materialized, again, taking a look back at our data worksheet here, what's actually being cached is this data block. You can take advantage of that fact by building multiple dashboards that use the same data block, right? So if you can, figure out a way to do that, right? So let's say you've got, a set of dashboards that you want to build. If you can find a way, and in many cases it's not that hard, if you can find a way to base those dashboards all on the same data block and the same data worksheet, then the server will only have to build a single materialized view. It just builds the materialized view for that one data block, and then all of the dashboards that use that data block, they can all hit that same materialized view. They can all hit that same cached file, right? Whereas if, for example, if you build, if every dashboard is based on a different data worksheet, then it's going to have to, and you want to materialize all of those dashboards, right? Then you're going to have, a larger set of materialized views, and you lose that efficiency of being able to work off, just have the single materialized view and have all the dashboards pull data out of it. So if at all possible, if you're building similar dashboards, try to base them on the same data block if you expect to be building materialized views. Number three, bypass the VPM. I said that earlier. There's that option there, apply VPM or bypass VPM. I think Jim mentioned that, or was it Les? I can't remember. Somebody mentioned that they don't have a problem with it, but in general, you'll probably find it beneficial to bypass the VPM. And keep in mind that you can apply parameterized filters to the data block. So if you want to, if you want to filter the data based on user, you can do that in the data worksheet. Right. So here's the data worksheet, and what you could do is something like apply a regular condition, not the MV update condition, but a regular condition. Something like, this is just an example, salesperson first name is equal to, and select session data here. There's from the pop-up menu, there's an option session data, and you can select something like user. So this basically, a condition like this means salesperson first name is equal to the currently logged in user. This option here called user returns the username of the currently logged in user. So basically, this condition would filter this data block and return only the records where salesperson first name matches whoever the currently logged in user is. Obviously, this kind of anticipates that the users who are logging in would be salespeople, right? So otherwise it won't match. But that's the type of condition. So if you've got your different salespeople logging in, then each salesperson who logs in will only see their own data as a result of this condition that's on the data block. So even if you're not using the VPM, right, if you're bypassing the VPM, you can still implement filtering of the data based on session information, user, group, or role, and this is the way you would do that, right? And that this will work better in general if you're using materialized views, doing it this way rather than doing it in the VPM. Okay, so that was number three, I think, best practice. Number four, implement fixed conditions on the data block, right? So what's a fixed condition? I just mean like any filtering condition, right? So let's say a filtering condition like, whatever, I don't know, city is equal to Boston, and any fixed condition like this, right? So if you're going to be applying fixed conditions somewhere, do it at the data block level, because remember that this is what is being stored. The data in this data block is what's being stored in the cache. So if you know that there are going to be some fixed conditions, and in general, whatever conditions you can put on the data block is only going to help you, right? Because it means it's going to be a smaller cache data set, faster retrieval, right? So any way that you can cut down the data in this the data block that's being cached, that will help you. But if you have a choice of putting a condition on the data block or putting the condition at the dashboard level, which you could also do, of course, right? You can, in the dashboard, you can apply a condition, right? So you can right-click on the chart and select condition, right? So rather than applying a fixed condition here in the dashboard, apply it at the data worksheet level, because then you're going to end up with a smaller cached data set and better performance. Okay, so that's another point. Number 5, place parameterized filters on the resultant data block to avoid sub-MV post-processing. Right, so this is something that I hinted at earlier, that sometimes when you look at the plan of the materialized view, remember there was that button called Show Plan in Enterprise Manager, sometimes that will say something to the effect of sub-MV will be post-processed or something like that. Right, and that generally means that you're not getting the full efficiency of the materialized view. So what would you do to avoid that type of thing? Generally, what you want to do is, if you have filtering, if you have multiple data blocks in your data worksheet, you want to put any parameterized filters on the final result. Right, so let's say, our data worksheet just has a single data block, but let's say that this data block here, right, this is the data block that we're building our dashboard off of, but let's say that this data block was the result of some other operations, right? Maybe you had a data block up here, a data block over here, you join them together, and you got this result, right? If you have any parameterized filtering conditions that you want to apply, you would want to put those conditions on this final result rather than on those kind of antecedent data blocks, right? You could, let's say that, this date field here, this is coming from some other data block that you had up here that you joined together with another data block. So, and you want to filter on the date field, rather than putting the filter up on this data block over here, you'd want to put that filter, right, when you define that condition, a parameterized condition. So let's say, you did something like, where's the date field? Right, order date is equal to, some parameter that's going to be, whoops, it disappeared. Right, so this is, where did I get to here? Oh, okay. Okay, so what I'm saying here is order date is equal to some variable. Right. So this is what I mean by a parameterized condition. Order date is equal to some parameter that the user will enter at a later time. It's a parameterized condition, right? So if you have conditions like that, right, rather than putting them on the parent data block, you would want to put those conditions on the resulting data block. That will give you your best shot of avoiding that kind of sub-MV situation, which will result in post-processing and inferior performance. Right, so it's just something to keep in mind, that you want to put conditions, if possible, on the resulting data block in the data worksheet. Last thing, and then I'll take any questions. Wow, this ended up being a lot longer than I thought. I apologize. The last thing is that when you're editing dashboards, let's say you're editing a dashboard that, it's a dashboard that you expect to be hitting, pulling data from a database with a tremendous amount of data. So you want to use the materialized view for that dashboard. So when you're editing that dashboard. So what you could do is, when you initially create the dashboard, the approach that you can take here, so let's say you're creating a new dashboard, new view sheet, and it's based on some worksheet, right? So you've got this new dashboard, and now this dashboard is going to be pulling data from a very large data set. So, if you let it run against, if you let the queries run against the database, it's going to be a very slow development process, because every time you do anything while you're designing it, it's going to be running these, long-running queries on the database, and you're going to have to sit and wait, right? So a way around that is to, first of all, start off using metadata view, right? So you can, right, so you've got this blank dashboard, and what I'll do is I'll switch it to metadata view, right? So I'll switch it to use metadata, and then I'll just add a chart. Right, so I'm just going to start building this dashboard, just throw in a chart, and do a little bit of hooking up this chart. Nothing fancy at all. Okay, and then save the dashboard. Right, so I'll save it and then call it my new dash, whatever it is. All right, so now you've got this dashboard saved. Now what you can do is you can go and materialize this dashboard, right? So even though it's not where you want it to be, but this is enough, just having a single chart in there or something. Now you can go ahead and you can go into Enterprise Manager and find that dashboard. Oops, server, repository, materialized view, create. Find that dashboard. Here it is, my new dash, and we'll just run through the whole procedure that I showed you before, materialize that dashboard so that a materialized view exists, and then as soon as a materialized view exists, then you can go ahead and switch out of metadata view. Then you go back, open up the options, turn off metadata, and now this dashboard will be running against the materialized view, right? And you should have snappy performance and a good design experience because it's running against the materialized view rather than running against the database. So that's just a little trick when you're developing dashboards against a very large data set. First, start off in metadata mode, save the dashboard, materialize the dashboard, and then you can switch it back into live data so that it'll be running against the materialized view. So the question is from Les, is it possible to use metadata as a default? That's a good question. Let me think. Well, that would have to be an administrator setting. I don't know. I'm going to add that to my list. I don't know. Good question. So I have a long list. Okay, so I'll check on those after we're done here today and hopefully get you an answer. If not today, then hopefully I'm doing some training on the beginning of next week, so hopefully by the middle of the week I'll get you some answers. Okay, and that basically wraps it up for me. So those are the best practices, at least the ones that I know of. So let me just see if there's any other questions. I'm sorry I went long. I must have been long-winded. I really didn't expect to go that long. Any questions on anything related to materialized views? Okay, you're welcome, Les. Any questions from anybody else? Okay, I'll just wait another minute just in case anybody's typing. Okay, doesn't seem like there's any more questions. So I'll just wish everyone a good weekend and hope to see you back here next month. I don't recall what the subject is next time, but I'm sure it will be very exciting. So have a nice weekend, everyone, and hope to see you then.